Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. The relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran is one of the most complex in the Middle East region. The two countries cut their diplomatic relations in 2016. Now, under China's mediation, Iran and Saudi Arabia announced in Beijing that they have decided to resume their diplomatic ties. To make sense of this major diplomatic breakthrough, I'm joined in Tehran, Iran by Mohammad Marandi, an Iranian academic and political analyst. Mr. Marandi, great to see you again. Saudi Arabia and Iran engaged in many rounds of negotiations previously in the past few years with the help of Iraq, as you know better than I do. What difference do you think this Beijing negotiation or negotiations have made? What were the sticking points previously that got resolved here in Beijing?
When the Iranian president was on his state visit to China, the two presidents sat together and discussed how to solve regional issues and to decrease tensions. And this idea was put forward by the Chinese president, and the Iranians were quite happy to see if they could push this forward. And as you rightly pointed out, the Iranians and the Saudis have been engaging in negotiations at a lower level. Deputy heads of the Supreme National Security Council of Iran and his counterpart in Saudi Arabia, they were talking on numerous occasions, mostly in Iraq. But this time around, the level of the delegations was higher, and they sat together for a number of days until they could settle all of their problems. So the Chinese government played a very positive and constructive role in solving and helping to solve this problem. And hopefully, now that Iran and Saudi Arabia have decided to establish ties, that will help solve the different problems that exist in West Asia, whether it's the war between Saudi Arabia and Yemen, the political problems in Lebanon, rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Syria. There are a host of files that hopefully, under the new circumstances, they can be pushed forward to some sort of resolution.
Mr. Marandi, you were in Beijing a month ago with President Raisi's delegation, whereby I had the chance to talk to your president and ask him about the Saudi-Iranian talks. I want you to listen to this.
和平和稳定，我们都知道，伊朗和沙特是两个区域内的大国。我们也注意到，伊朗和沙特最近进行了几轮的谈判。伊朗的外交部长也说，希望通过这些谈判，逐步恢复和沙特的外交关系。能不能给我们透露一下，两国谈判有没有最新的进展？您对双方恢复外交关系的前景怎么看？
ما مذاکراتی داشتیم با سعودی‌ها، چند دور مذاکره با میانجیگری کشور عراق صورت گرفته و با همه کشورهای منطقه ما در حال گفتگو هستیم و گفتگو رو بهترین راه میدونیم برای حل مشکلات و مناقشات. حتما در این رابطه هم میتونه گفتگوها بین دو کشور ادامه پیدا کنه و آمادگی برای ادامه گفتگو رو ما داریم.
So what do you make of his answer? Apparently, like you said, this diplomatic breakthrough between Tehran and Riyadh was in the making back then.
Yes, the decision between the Iranian and Chinese presidents to push this forward was literally made hours before your interview. And of course, it was discussed before the trip as well. But I think that this puts China in a very positive light. In our part of the world, in West Asia, the United States has a history of bullying, wars, dirty wars, sanctions used to impose its will upon the region, constantly using divisions between different countries or creating divisions between different countries. And here we have China, on the other hand, using its good offices to help bring countries closer to each other and to bring about greater stability in the Persian Gulf and the broader West Asia. So it is good news both for West Asia, it's good news for Asian integration, and in general, all such dialogue is good news for peace and stability and the well-being of citizens.
Talking about the American response to the rapprochement between Riyadh and Tehran, this is the statement from the White House. John Kirby, the spokesperson, said, "De-escalation and diplomacy together with deterrence are key pillars of the policy President Biden outlined during his visit to the region last year." How would you assess the American influence and credibility in the region over the past decades?
Well, the word deterrence doesn't really make any sense here. It's completely unnecessary, and it shows that the Americans really don't want peace and stability. And when we look at what many senior think tank officials say and policymakers have been saying in the United States, it's clear that they are very unhappy. And the same is true in Tel Aviv. The problem is that the United States, instead of playing a constructive role, instead of making real friends in the region, what they've done from literally the beginning of their presence in this part of the world is that they began destroying the region. In the 1980s, they supported Saddam Hussein in his invasion of Iran. The US and its allies gave Saddam chemical weapons. Then they also supported extremists in Afghanistan in their dirty war. Later on, it came back to haunt them, and we had 9/11. And then the US invaded Afghanistan. Then they invaded and destroyed Iraq. And of course, the dirty war in Syria and in Yemen and Libya, and the list goes on. So the United States has destroyed huge parts of West Asia. And they've constantly manipulated one country against another, or one part of society against another. And the only reason, or let's say a major reason, why I think this breakthrough has happened is because the United States is on the decline. As the United States weakens, relatively speaking, there are greater opportunities for countries to reestablish ties, to improve ties, both in West Asia, but also in the broader Asian continent as well. So on the one hand, the Chinese, the Iranians, and the Saudis wanted to build these bridges to solve problems. But on the other hand, I think the very fact that the American presence in this region has been weakened, that enabled them to push this idea forward, meaning the Iranians, the Chinese, and the Saudis more easily.
You're talking about the Western response, that is one marked by bitterness, vigilance, and like you said, lamenting over a lesser role Joe Biden's administration has played. For example, NBC News said, and I quote, "There were growing fears in Washington that the deal could help spell the end of the United States' preeminence in the region and beyond." What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, that's a very disturbing perspective to have. This region belongs to the people of this region. And the United States has no right to expect to have preeminence. The United States, in fact, if it would rethink its role in the world and treat other countries with respect and as equals, the United States would benefit a great deal more from its presence in this region. Instead, what we've had is that the United States, because it demands preeminence, it has launched wars that have caused huge problems for the United States economy. In the 2008 economic crisis was deeply impacted by the costs of the war in Afghanistan and the cost of war in Iraq. Trump himself admitted, I think he said the United States wasted $6 or $7 trillion. So this American exceptionalism, this notion that the United States has exceptional rights, ultimately, in the long run, hurts the United States more than it benefits the United States. And of course, it creates great hardship for the people who have to endure U.S. policies.
Finally, I want to come back to the interview with President Raisi. You've heard him. That was a very short answer. He was very tight-lipped, if you will. Was he observing the diplomatic protocol, the terms on the negotiations? He obviously doesn't want to reveal too much at that point.
Yes, I'm sure that was the objective. The Chinese government said nothing. He said nothing specifically, even though your question was directed at the issue between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but he didn't say anything about the proposal. And the Saudis didn't say anything either. And during the last week, it was not announced that the delegations from Saudi Arabia and Iran were in Beijing. We only heard about it, and the public heard about it, when there was a deal. So being tight-lipped was intentional in order to give the initiative a better chance for success. And fortunately, it has been successful. And I hope that Iran, China, and Saudi Arabia, all of them reap the benefits.
You know, one can argue that the releasing strategy of this news, or not releasing strategy prematurely, worked one way or the other, however you look at it. Mr. Marandi, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.